The topic I have chosen for today is structure of the heart and the cardiac cycle. In human beings, the heart is a four-chambered structure and it is present in the thoracic cavity. It is present in between the lungs in a place known as mediastinum. The heart is slightly towards the left of the thoracic cavity. Then, the heart is surrounded by a pair of pericardial membranes. The pericardial membranes are separated by a narrow space known as the pericardial space, which is filled with pericardial fluid. The pericardial fluid protects the heart from mechanical injuries and also from the friction generated during the heartbeat. Then, I have told you the heart is made of four chambers. The upper chambers are known as atria and the ventral chambers are known as ventricles. In the figure, our left side becomes right and the right side becomes left. So we should not confuse. So this is the right atrium, this is the left atrium. This is the right ventricle, this is the left ventricle. The walls of the ventricles, the walls of the atria are thin when compared with the wall of the ventricles. See the thickness of the ventricles. The ventricles are made of thick walls and the atria are made of thin walls. Even among the ventricles, the left ventricle is made of thicker walls than the right ventricle. Then, the upper chambers are also known as receiving chambers because they receive blood. The ventral chambers are known as distributing channels. Again, the right side chambers, that is, the right atrium, right ventricle contain venous blood, whereas the left atrium and left ventricle contains oxygenated blood. Then, the right atrium receives venous blood through two veins known as anterior precaval vein and posterior caval vein. Precaval vein or simply postcaval vein. They bring venous blood from various parts of the body into the right atrium. Then, the left atrium receives oxygenated blood from the lungs through pulmonary vein. Then, both the atria, here you can see clearly, are separated by a septum known as interatrial septum. Similarly, both the ventricles are also separated by a septum known as interventricular septum. Then, the atria and ventricles are separated by interatrioventricular septum. This is atrioventricular septum. The atrioventricular septum is perforated and provided with valves. The valves present between the right atrium and right ventricle are known as tricuspid valves. Tricuspid valves. Similarly, the valves present between the left atrium and left ventricle are known as bicuspid valves or mitral valves. These valves control the blood flow from the atrium into the ventricles. Opening into the right ventricle is the pulmonary aorta. Similarly, opening into the left ventricle is the aorta or the main artery. It is also known as left systemic trunk. Then, the ventricular wall, I have told you, is very thick and is also folded, producing trabeculae or papillary muscles. These are the papillary muscles. The papillary muscles are connected to the atrioventricular walls by fibers known as chordae tendinae. Chordae tendinae. These are chordae tendinae. They hold the atrioventricular walls in their place during ventricular contraction. So that is about the structure of the heart. Then, in the heart, there is a nodal tissue. The nodal tissue is made of SCAN, AVN, then bundle of his Purkinje fibers. First one, SCAN or sinoatrial node. It is present in the upper right corner of the right atrium. The sinoatrial node is also known as the pacemaker. It is made of muscle fibers. So, the pacemaker is known as myogenic pacemaker. So, a pacemaker made of muscle cells is known as myogenic pacemaker. So, in human beings, the pacemaker is myogenic. That means the action potentials are generated in the pacemaker itself. The nervous system has no role in initiating the action potentials. So this is the pacemaker. The action potentials generated in the pacemaker spread through both the atria, and as a result the atria contract. Then on the lower left corner of the right atrium, there is another node known as atrioventricular node. The atrioventricular node gives rise to some fibers, a bundle of fibers known as AVN bundle or atrioventricular nodal bundle. This AVN bundle enters the interventricular septum and divides into two branches. And these are known as bundle of His. His is the name of a scientist who discovered it. So the bundle of His gives rise to a number of Purkinje fibers. The Purkinje fibers innervate both the ventricular chambers. In this way, there is a well-developed nodal tissue in the heart of human beings. Remember, there is no direct connection between the atria and ventricles except through the AVN bundle. So AVN bundle is the only contact, direct contact between the atria and ventricles. Then, the heartbeat. Our heart beats 70 to 75 times per minute. That means, on the average, our heart beats 72 times. One heartbeat consists of one diastole and one systole. So, one diastole and one systole constitutes one heartbeat. Diastole means relaxation of the heart muscles. Systole means contraction of the heart muscles. So, one heartbeat consists of one diastole and one systole, and already I have told you the rate of heartbeat is 70 to 75 times per minute, or on the average 72 times. Then, stroke volume. The amount of blood expelled from any one of the ventricles in each heartbeat is known as stroke volume. The stroke volume is about 70 ml of blood. Then, cardiac output. The amount of blood pumped by the heart in 1 minute constitutes the cardiac output. It is measured from either of the aorta, either from the pulmonary aorta or from the left aortic trunk. So if you multiply 72 by 70, we get the cardiac output. It is roughly 5 liters. So every minute, our heart pumps 5 liters of blood. In our body, roughly there is 5 liters of blood, and the entire blood present in the body passes through the heart every minute. Then, pacemaker is also known as trendsetter. Trendsetter means it initiates the heartbeat. Then, the sequential events taking place during the heartbeat constitute cardiac cycle. The cardiac cycle consists of 3 steps. First one, atrial systole. Second one, ventricular systole. And third one is joint diastole. Joint diastole. This diastole of atria and ventricles occur almost at the same time, so it is known as joint diastole. Now let us see how the cardiac cycle occurs in human beings. Now let us begin with joint diastole. During the joint diastole, both the atria and both the ventricles are in a relaxed state. Blood from various parts of the body, or the venous blood from various parts of the body, is brought into the right atrium. Similarly, blood from the lungs, that is oxygenated blood, is brought into the left atrium. During joint diastole, the tricuspid and bicuspid valves are kept open. You must remember this point very carefully. During joint diastole, the tricuspid and bicuspid valves are kept open. As a result, what happens? The blood entering the atria also flows into the ventricles. So, at the end of joint diastole, the ventricles are already filled with blood up to 70%. That means the ventricles are filled with blood up to the level of 70% by the end of joint diastole. Then atrial systole begins. Now the atria contract. When the atria contract, what happens? The blood present in the atria is pumped into the ventricles. Now the size of the atria becomes smaller, and now the ventricles are completely filled with blood. The right ventricle is filled with venous blood and the left ventricle is filled with oxygenated blood. That means before atrial diastole, the ventricles are filled 70%, and with the atrial systole, the ventricles are completely filled with blood. That means atrial systole pumps 30% of the ventricular blood into them. Then comes the ventricular systole. Now the ventricles contract. Remember, as the action potentials generated in the sinoatrial node spread across the atria contract. Then, as the action potentials enter the ventricles through AV node, the ventricles contract. So soon after the contraction of the atria, the ventricles contract. This is ventricular systole. During ventricular systole, what happens? First, the atrioventricular valves they close to prevent backward movement of blood into the atria. So in the beginning of the ventricular systole, the tricuspid and bicuspid valves close. This closure of the valves produces the first heart sound known as lub. So the sound lub is produced at the beginning of ventricular systole. Then, as the pressure increases inside the ventricles, the semilunar valves present at the opening of common pulmonary aorta and the aortic trunks open. Now blood can't go back into the atria because these valves are closed. So the only way is this blood can enter the pulmonary aorta and this blood can enter the aorta or the main aortic trunk. So the venous blood present in the right atrium flows into the pulmonary aorta and goes to the lungs for oxygenation. Similarly, the oxygenated blood present in the left ventricle enters the aorta and goes to all parts of the body. In this way, the ventricles contract. Then, joint diastole begins. Now, the ventricles relax. As the ventricles relax, what happens? the blood present in the pulmonary aorta and aortic trunk tries to come back into the ventricles. And because of this, what happens? The semilunar valves close suddenly and they prevent backward movement of blood into the ventricles. So the closure of semilunar valves present in the pulmonary aorta and aortic trunk produce the second heart sound known as the dub. So in this way, two sounds are heard, two distinct sounds are heard during the heartbeat. The first sound is lub, the second one is dub. Lub is produced by the closure of the tricuspid and bicuspid valves, and the second heart sound, dub, is produced by the closure of semilunar valves. That you have to remember very carefully. Then, electrocardiograph. It is the graphical representation of electrical activity of the heart. There are a number of waves here. The P wave. P wave indicates electrical depolarization of atria. You have studied about resting potential, depolarization, and repolarization. The cardiac muscle tissue remains in a polarized state. When the action potentials are released from sinoatrial node, what happens? The atrial muscles undergo depolarization. Thus, depolarization is represented by the P wave. After the depolarization of the atria, depolarization of the ventricles takes place. And the depolarization of the ventricles is represented by QRS complex. QRS complex. Then, the T wave. T wave represents the repolarization of the ventricles. The repolarization of the atria is not visible because of the overlapping of the repolarization of the ventricles. In this way, in the electrocardiograph, we come across P wave, QRS complex, and T wave. Through electrocardiograph, the cardiologist can find out various complications present in the heart during its functioning. So, this is briefly about the structure of the heart and the cardiac cycle. Okay, thank you.